Who's in charge of technology? Are we being live streamed and stuff? Sorry, yeah. Well, look, good morning. Can I welcome everyone to the meeting? It says in my brief, including press and the public. It is the first one back. They could be online. Who are entitled to observe the proceedings. This is the first meeting of the board being held in person since January 2020 due to the awful pandemic. I almost embraced the commissioner. That's how much I've missed him. That's how much I've missed him. This meeting is being webcast on london.gov.uk and on TfL's YouTube channel. Can I say, genuinely, it's so lovely to see you all in person. It really is. I've got a few announcements to make before we move to the main agenda items. First, I'm pleased to welcome back the members that I reappointed in September, whose term goes until September 2024. Congratulations and welcome back. Following an extensive open recruitment campaign, and I think Heidi and the team did all the hard work and the various interviews and stuff, I'll shortly be announcing new appointments that will further enhance an already very effective board, and they are very, very impressive. Not that you aren't impressive, they're equally impressive, dare I say it. But at the last meeting, I reported on the outcome of the inquest into the tragic accident at Sandylands on the 9th of November 2016, which saw the loss of the lives of 7 people: Dane Chinnery, Donald Collette, Robert Huxley, Philip Logan, Dorota Renkowitz, Philip Siri and Mark Smith. I'm sure I speak for all of us when I say our thoughts remain with their families and everyone affected. Following the inquest, the senior coroner has made a report on the prevention of future deaths, and TfL will respond by the time asked of us, which is by the 17th of November 2021. The Commission's report contains more information on this, and we'll continue to do all that we can to ensure that such a tragedy does not happen again. Last week I had the pleasure of visiting Coventry. The Commissioner enjoyed sending me to Coventry to launch London's new electric vehicle infrastructure strategy to promote the ULEZ expansion, which begins on the 25th of October, T-5 team. And to demonstrate how London's investment in green technology is generating good quality jobs across the UK. I had the pleasure, and it was a pleasure, of meeting senior staff and employees at the London Electric Vehicle Company factory, at Capita's ULEZ headquarters, including some TfL staff as well, where TfL contracts directly result in the employment of 2,000 people across the West Midlands. I'm grateful for the effort of all staff involved in helping to deliver our ambitious policies to reduce emissions from road transport in London. Can I formally acknowledge the devastating news that 102 transport staff have lost their lives to coronavirus. The families and loved ones of all of those who have died should remain in all our thoughts. As the son of a bus driver, this is deeply personal to me, and I can't help but think how it could have been my dad or his colleagues or friends affected. The contribution transport workers have made to London during the pandemic has been immeasurable, keeping the network running during extraordinary circumstances and enabling other key workers to get to work. Throughout the pandemic, we have closely followed the government, World Health Organization and Public Health England advice. TfL and its partners took early action to reduce the risk to our staff and transport users, including, for example, enhanced cleaning regimes, protective screens and middle door boarding buses, and making masks available to staff. We also commissioned an urgent independent study from the UCL Institute of Health Equity in February 2020 to understand the impact of coronavirus on our bus workers and ensure we're taking every possible measure to protect our frontline staff. We've also worked with Imperial College and many other experts as well. Despite the mandatory wearing of face coverings on public transport ending in July, we've kept it as a condition of carriage on TfL services and continued to lobby ministers to reintroduce the national framework or allow us to pass a bylaw so we can use the police to enforce face masks on public transport. I think this should be part of Plan A from the government, not Plan B. We've contacted the families of London's transport workers who have sadly passed away from coronavirus to inform them of our proposal for a new permanent memorial. We're applying for the memorial to be in a pedestrian plaza on Braham Street, Aldgate, and to be in place by summer 2022. The memorial will include a plaque paying tribute to the workers, benches to allow quiet reflection and remembrance, and a cherry blossom tree. The tree provides a link to the new public garden of blossom trees in Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park, which I opened with transport and other frontline heroes to commemorate all Londoners who have lost their lives during this awful pandemic. I hope that the memorial will be a place where their loved ones can find solace and be a reminder of their heroic work, which made it possible for us to come through the pandemic by keeping our city moving. It's with those we've lost in mind that I'll continue with the Commissioner to do absolutely everything we can to keep our transport workers and passengers safe. My final announcement is around safety, which is paramount at TfL. I invite members present to raise any safety issues, either under matters arising, the Commissioner's report, or under a specific agenda item. Issues can also be raised with the appropriate member of the Executive Committee after the meeting. That's it by way from me. I'm going to pass over to Howard now, who'll give us any apologies.
Thank you, Chair. There were apologies for absence from Bronwyn Handyside and Dr Nelson Ugashankan. Bronwyn, as some of you may know, has been unwell, but she's making a good recovery and she hopes to return to board meetings very shortly. She also sends us all her thanks for all the messages of good wishes that she received and also for the small gift that we sent to her. Dr Skorupska has a prior engagement this morning. She's actually giving evidence before a Transport Select Committee and she's hoping to join us as soon as that's finished, perhaps around 11:30 or a little later. And Kay Carberry has let me know that she needs to leave the meeting around 12 o'clock. Just in terms of staff, Peter McNaught is with us deputising for Andy Lord, who's on leave, and also Marion Kelly is here for Lily Matson. I'm very grateful to her for attending. Thank you.
Thanks, Howard. Any other apologies? Great. Let's move on to declarations of interest. Howard, over to you again.
Thank you. Since the last meeting of the board, Dr Lynn Sloman has advised us that she has a new appointment as the chair of the Welsh Government's Roads Review Panel, and her biography and register of interests on the TfL website has been updated accordingly. All members' interests are on the website and are up to date. And I'm not aware of any interest that relates specifically to any item of business on the agenda today, but obviously this would be an appropriate moment for anybody to declare anything if there was anything that is of relevance.
Please, during the course of the meeting, I think something arises, just feel free, please, to declare it, or just ask Howard for his advice during the meeting, and we'll make sure we do so. It's best to err on the side of caution for obvious reasons. Thanks, Howard. Let's move on to minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of July. Can I ask colleagues just to confirm they're happy with them as an accurate recollection? I'll sign this off formally as I normally do. Let's move on to matters arising, the action list and use of delegated authority. Howard.
Thank you, Chair. So there's been one use of authority delegated by the board in relation to the Finance Committee's approval of the updated Treasury Management Strategy and the Treasury Management Policies, and one mayoral direction to TfL in relation to the financial support to fund the Seven Sisters Market Traders. The paper in front of you also seeks authority in relation to two senior staff appointments, which are matters reserved to the board. The first being the Statutory Chief Finance Officer, and where it is proposed that Patrick Doig's interim appointment as Statutory CFO be made permanent. And then also there's a request that in relation to the Director of Risk and Assurance, that the board delegate authority to the Chair of the Audit and Assurance Committee, who's kindly agreed to receive that delegation in discussions before the meeting, to approve the future permanent appointment of the Director of Risk and Assurance. We've also provided you with updates against all of the actions as usual. I think the vast majority are completed, or we've indicated where we are in terms of progressing those as appropriate. I wasn't proposing to go through those one by one. If anybody has any questions, please just let me know.
Thanks, Howard. We're asking note that from Howard. Is that agreed? Thanks, Greg. Thanks, everyone. Let's move on to the Commissioner's report. Andy, over to you.
Sure. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Sadiq. And as the Mayor said, it's nice to actually be in person and to meet my board members, many of whom for the first time. So, Sadiq, I'll start where you started, which is indeed a sombre note, which is, as the Mayor said, we have now lost 102 colleagues with COVID, which is a devastating milestone that we never wanted to reach. You know, we were dreading hitting that 100 milestone, and sure enough we did. In fact, 10 colleagues have been lost due to the pandemic since we last met. which is indeed, I'd say, devastating for the whole organisation. These are wonderful human beings. They were people who rose to the challenge and stepped up and carried on, as we say at TfL. We carried on through the virus and through the pandemic, and they paid the ultimate price. So they're people that we'll never forget. And as the Mayor rightly said, there is a memorial that's going to be installed on not quite sure how you pronounce that, Braham Street in Aldgate, which will commemorate their sacrifice forever. And we very much look forward to getting that memorial put in place. So the current status of it is that we have put in a planning application to Tower Hamlets Council. Subject to approvals, we aim to have that memorial delivered as quickly as possible, such that it can be installed in summer of 2022. And rightly, we have consulted with the families because this is a commemoration of their loved ones. I have also written to the families to again reiterate my personal condolences and to let them know that the plans are well in hand. In the meantime, we continue to do, as the Mayor said, take every possible precaution, and particularly in light of the fact that we're now getting into the winter season, what's going to happen with the Plan B, what's happening with flu. So I can assure the board that we're not taking our eye off this at all. In fact, we're continuing and continually looking to see what more we can do in terms of testing facilities, which remain in place at King's Cross, at Palestra, at Baker Street, at Pier Walk and Endeavour Square. And so far to date, we've tested more than 6,300 employees, and we've distributed 2,800 home testing kits. So if anyone needs anything, they get it. It's as simple as that. And we continue to offer Pfizer vaccinations to our staff through a series of pop-up clinics. In parallel, we are, though, welcoming people back to the network. We're making sure that it's safe to do. As you know, we have a full recovery plan. I used the Northern Line to get here this morning. It was pretty busy. So that's good to see. And progressively, as coronavirus restrictions lift, we have seen an increasing level of ridership, which I'll come back to shortly. It's also good to see just how busy the weekends are. We've had a lot of big events of late. Obviously, the football season has restarted. We've had the marathon. We've had boxing events. We've had test match test match cricket. There are some test match critics probably as well. We've had welcome home events for the Paralympic heroes, and I'm really proud of the teams. And Peter, you've been seminal to that. And Gareth, you and your team, we successfully delivered all of those events under difficult circumstances, actually, because obviously we're still in the throes of the pandemic. So a big shout out to my operational teams for doing that. We continue to mount our campaigns to safely and reliably get people back onto the system, to give them that confidence that it's clean, that it's orderly, that it's safe. And a big shout out to Vernon, who's our recovery director. Vernon, for your stellar work in this regard. And the campaigns that we've been running, I've talked about them before, very much, Mr. Mayor, complementing your Let's Do London campaign. We do, though, continue to encourage people to travel at quieter times. So if you don't have it, get it, please. The TfL Go app is superb. It really does show you everything you need to know, and it shows you when the busier times are, when the quieter times, so you can plan your journey and have confidence that that data is up to date. So I'm very proud of that, actually. And we're continuing to work with other key sectors, such as the construction sector, to again stagger people's journey times where that's possible. And we continue to reach out to businesses, to the CBI, to London First, to the West End Company, to understand what's going on in terms of their plans, in terms of recovery, so that we can progressively match supply to demand. Which brings me on nicely, actually, in some ways, a good segue into demand. We have, of course, had a major milestone, Sadiq, under your leadership since we last met, which is we successfully opened the first extension to the Tube network this century, 21st century, which was, of course, the two beautiful new stations at Battersea Power Station and Nine Elms on the Northern Line. So, Mr. Mayor, you were there with the Secretary of State. It was fantastic. It was flawless. And I'm very proud of my MPD team who brought that in, my four favourite words, on time, on budget. Actually, we were slightly below budget, and I'm very proud of the MPD team under Stuart Harvey who delivered that. Plus, Andy Lord and the ops team who got us ready, got us through trial operations, such that the adjective I would use to describe that opening was flawless. absolutely flawless. It was fantastic, and it included a beautiful piece of marketing. And we've got posters that we're producing, which replicated the famous Pink Floyd album cover of the Animals. I think Councillor Bell remembers that. So rather than an inflatable pig flying between the towers of the iconic Battersea Power Station, we had an 8-foot inflatable roundel, which was absolutely superb. But the key to this is that this is a classic example of how there's a symbiotic relationship between development and transit, or public transport, because the tube extension wouldn't have happened without the development, and the development wouldn't have happened without the tube extension, which is, of course, a point that I'd less than subtly made to the Secretary of State, who'll be pleased to know, Mr Mayor, on the day, because there's plenty more where that came from. We know that this is a very powerful combination. So for the NLE, 25,000 new jobs, 20,000 new homes were created because of that wonderful occasion. The Deputy Mayor was with us as well. And most recently, I've been along to the Barking Riverside extension, which is, of course, another transformative project where we have something like 4 kilometres of extension of the overground from Barking mainline station through to what was a derelict part of London by the river, and that is going to be transformed. 4,000 new homes to kick off with. Ultimately will be 10,000 homes in a previously derelict former coal power station, actually, by the river. And again, that's transformative. That again remains on schedule, and we're really looking forward to opening that up in the autumn of next year, which will be on time. Under your leadership again, more great work by my team on ULEZ. Gareth, you and your team have done an awesome job, as we heard earlier on. It's T-5 to what will be a world first, this expansion of the ultra-low emission zone, a massive tool in our battle against air pollution, which can't be underestimated how timely that is. Despite a huge logistical exercise to get all the cameras ready, to get all the signage ready, to get the publicity ready such that people know about it, we are ready to go. On Crossrail, I'll let Mark talk to that when we get to the agenda item, but rest assured that we continue to micromanage that mega project to the finish date. Literally, and we had it this morning at 0800, Mark and I speak every morning, don't we, Mark? You always look forward to those calls. We have an 8 o'clock meeting every day where we are now progressively finishing off trial running, getting the last critical blockade complete, and at the moment we're about halfway through it and it's going really well, which is around loading up the software that we need to make the service really reliable. We then, as long as that all goes fine, we'll get into trial ops, and trial ops, as long as that goes fine, is then the final stage, and we'll be able to open the Crossrail, the Elizabeth line, and we'll be very proud of that. So we've made a lot of good progress since we last met. We've opened, or handed over to us Paddington and Whitechapel stations, plus Abbey Wood, which was pretty much complete anyway, but it needed some work done on the escalators. So that only leaves Canary Wharf and Bond Street. There's still work to do there, but we're absolutely driving them to the finish line. More good news, the night tube, again, at the Mayor's behest. We have worked extremely hard to get the Central and Victoria Line services resumed. That will happen from the 27th of November. They will run through the night on Fridays and Saturdays. Very topical, of course, with the renaissance of the London nightlife. It's really important that we service that. It's also important that we provide safe travel for women and girls, which is a very topical issue right now. And we are looking to restore the remaining lines as soon as we possibly can. And then finally, one other point that I'd just like to make is it's slightly inside baseball, but it's very important nonetheless. I always felt that there's 3 strands to the recovery, the obvious 2 being the restoration of our finances and the restoration of our ridership, which are, of course, indelibly interlinked. But to me, there was a third, and that is to rebuild the capability and the morale of the organisation. So to look at how we can emerge from this, having tackled some issues which maybe had not previously been tackled and had long dogged the organisation or frustrated our colleagues. So we've put together, well, actually, I'll correct that. We didn't. It was deliberately done. We invited colleagues from across the business to come up with what they wanted the vision of TfL to be and what they wanted the underlying values to be. So we conducted a series of workshops We invited comments on Yammer. We held all sorts of face-to-face and remote sessions, and we have produced a document that is designed by the employees, by our colleagues, which I think is incredibly powerful. So it's you tell us what you want from your TfL to ultimately create a less hierarchical, less male-dominated, more diverse, less bureaucratic, less how else would I describe it? Sort of less bureaucratic, less frustrating organisation, such that you can truly develop your and reach your true potential as colleagues. And what I said in the supporting video was, if I can go from graduate trainee to commissioner, so can you. We want to create an organisation where everyone can reach their full potential. And the reaction to that has been really positive, actually. So if anyone would like to see that document, as I said, it's largely internal, but it aims to tackle head-on with tangible actions, creating a better TfL post-COVID. So 2 final points. One, I'd like to, as ever, thank my frontline colleagues out there who actually deliver the service, who do a great job under difficult circumstances. Plus, my management and admin teams, it's a relentless challenge. We're under lots of pressure with the finances. Simon has led the way in stellar fashion on that. But also to just thank everyone for the work that they do day in, day out to keep London moving. And finally, Mr. Mayor, I saw it was announced today that you have been appointed to the chair of the C40 Cities, the organisation that will tackle climate change across the world. It's a global organisation. So on behalf of Transport for London, congratulations.
Thanks, Andy. That's an inspirational report. Thanks, Andy. Questions or comments for Andy? I'll start from there and work down this way, Greg. So I saw Kay first, then I saw Julian.
Thanks very much, Andy, for that largely positive and very encouraging report. Could I just ask a question about the remarks you made about the return of ridership? I very much appreciate the efforts that have been made to get people back onto the network, and the campaign in July was really impressive. But nevertheless, we have undershot our forecast up to Q2. And I appreciate that we weren't in control of the date when the government decided to open up the economy. It's very difficult to predict the rate at which people are going to start coming back into central London offices. And we are still waiting for tourists to return. So there are very understandable factors. However, I wonder whether we do know anything about levels of confidence and how that might be affecting people's propensity to come back onto the network. And on that subject, I'll go back to what you were saying, Mr. Mayor, about the representations we've made to government about enforcing face coverings on the system, because you only have to ride around, particularly on the tube, to see that the conditions of carriage are very widely disregarded. Well, it may be that we don't think that that is affecting confidence. I certainly know anecdotally it is affecting the confidence of a lot of people that I know who are taking the decision to continue to use their cars rather than to travel by tube. So it's a question about what do we know about confidence, and is that affecting the rate of return to ridership levels that we were expecting. But secondly, just to ask directly, what kind of response have we had from government to the lobbying that you mentioned, Sadiq, in your opening remarks? Thank you.
Thanks. Can I take Julian first,
Sure.
then we'll come back to you. Julian.
Thanks, Chair. 2 quick points. And the first one's from a kind of borough perspective. Page 23 talks about bus service changes, and we've also got in the recovery plan the 4% reduction in bus services going forward. And it's just a plea, and I know I've said it many times, but this is from my colleagues in the boroughs, that and we talk about full engagement with partners, but make sure the boroughs are fully briefed in advance. I know that we are making efforts to reach out, but just to put that one on record again. Second major point that I had was around the healthy streets, safer streets section on pages 28 and 29, which talks about the safer junctions work and the work that's been done around Holborn Gyratory after the sad death of Dr. Marta Kravich. We on the Safety, Sustainability and HR panel have seen that the actual numbers of cyclists killed or seriously injured has gone up, even though it's safer in terms of number journeys that are taken. And it was two things really. One, to ask if it's possible to update that April 2017 list of safer junctions, because it's quite a while ago now. It's 6 years since that data that informed that list of 73 junctions was chosen. So I think there's probably some work needed to update that. Excellent that we've made progress and we've got 43 of those 73 junctions finished, but a timetable in terms of where we are for those 30 that we haven't. Just anecdotally, we had a cyclist death in Ealing on the Lido junction in West Ealing a couple of years ago, very tragic incident, but again, that was part of a livable neighbourhood scheme to improve that, but that's got lost. So this is a kind of plea to our government colleagues who are with us. Unfortunately, Andrew Gilligan's not here this morning, but that important safety work around junctions for cyclists is critical, and we need that long-term funding agreement for that to incorporate those things like councils' LIP funding, livable neighbourhood funding, so that we can get this safety work for cyclists done. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Andy.
Sure, I'll take them in reverse order if I may. So starting with Councillor Bell. First up, we'll take an action on that list, unless anyone wants to comment on it, but I suggest we take an action on that April 2017 list to provide you with an update on the time frame for the remaining 30. Unless Gareth, you wanted to comment on that?
Well, only to say that we are in progress against that original list, some of which, as you know, are incorporated into wider schemes. So, for example, some of the cycling improvements we've got north to south and so on, and other things like livable neighbourhoods. Your point around sustained funding is really important in that, because we have a pipeline of schemes coming into design, but we need to be able to progress through to delivery on that. And then just on your updating of the list and the analysis that sits behind that, we do have a programme of work ongoing at the moment, updating all of the statistics that we could get in all the time from the Metropolitan Police, doing analysis not only on junctions but also on links of roads, because we do know that some links of roads are also particularly problematic for cyclists and others. So that work is ongoing. I do suggest we come back and maybe to the panel or somewhere give a more detailed update on the precise timings of each of those junctions, which are incorporated in cycling schemes and which are standalone.
And Gareth, might I just stick with you in response to Councillor Bell made a reference to the bus changes and the plea for engagement with the councils. I think we can confirm we do.
We absolutely are on the changes that we propose. The majority of changes at present are to frequencies, where we've got excess capacity, because particularly in central London, we've got more bus capacity on routes than we have people travelling. That's not just because of the recovery process, but it's also because of alternatives such as the Northern Line extension and such as walking and cycling. So we're adjusting frequencies primarily there. But two things to say. One is we are and will engage on any changes substantively with boroughs. Secondly, we are planning this autumn a much more substantial discussion with individual boroughs about the future of the bus network in their boroughs, in order to get really strong engagement from boroughs alongside our bus priority programme and other things like that. So there is quite a lot of activity planned for this autumn and beyond.
Thank you. And then turning to Kay's questions. You're absolutely right that there is, we believe, a correlation between customers' confidence and ridership. I mean, there are other factors. The primary and dominant factor right now is office repopulation, which, as you also correctly identified, was somewhat impacted by the fact that the so-called Freedom Day shifted by a month. That had quite a profound effect, actually, we believe, on our ridership. So face coverings is a factor. We have, under Sadiq's leadership, we have tried to get government to reinstate the legal requirement for face coverings, but for now they have not accommodated that request. So we continue to try to enforce the conditions of carriage, which is a tough gig, and I stood on gate lines myself to try to persuade people, because people are aware that there is actually no legal remedy or in fact no associated fine, but we do try to enforce that. So it's an ongoing battle. I'd like to think actually that government position will change if the situation deteriorates, which obviously we hope it doesn't, but if it does, that strengthens our argument. So is there anything, Vernon, you'd like to add in terms of confidence?
If I may,
Sure.
there's quite a lot to unpack in your questions, Kay. In terms of face coverings, one of the things also to remember that there are several other protections on that. I'll come on to that in a second. Let's just say what's happening. 75% of Londoners have used the public transport network in the last 28 days. They may not be using it as frequently, but they're using it. And we know, and actually London Travel Watch have done some research on this, that 9 out of 10 people that are travelling on trains, for example, are confident in doing so. It's very often that first step to take the first journey, which is the important thing. And then once people have actually experienced the network, then that confidence is reinforced. I think, just building on Andy's point, step 4, which was the move away from the work from home message, was delayed by a month. And it went into July, right up against when people were going away on holiday as well. And all of the feedback that we've had from firms was that they really put on ice their return, even starting to think about their return to work until September as a result of that. But we did see an increase in the commute. So at the beginning of September, we were at about 45% of ridership on the tube, and today we are pushing 60% every day. The bounce back in leisure traffic has been much stronger. So at the weekend and in the evenings, because people have been able to go places as the economy opened up. So it is coming back steadily, and firms are getting their heads around their return to work plans. So on face coverings, 91% of people are aware that it is a requirement. Of those who they feed back in our surveys, 72% of people say they always wear one, and half of the remainder say that they don't wear one because they have an exemption. Now, we've all got our personal experiences of that at different times of day and so on, but that's what people say. And in addition to the enforcement side of things that Gareth might want to comment on, we've upped the posters. We've upped every 5 minutes at tube stations there is a reminder that to protect us all, it's a requirement to wear face coverings. That's every 15 minutes on the buses. And we've used our various other communications mechanisms to get that across as well, millions of emails and all sorts of things. So what we've ended up with, I know Simon and Patrick will cover it a bit later in the finance presentation, is that we're on weekdays we are at about 60% on the tube, significantly higher as a percentage of weekend traffic over the weekends, up to 75% on the tube, about 75% solidly on the buses. And in terms of revenue, we're 71% of pre-pandemic revenues in the round for this period, 72% this week. The tube lags the buses. The buses are pretty much on where we thought we would be, there or thereabouts. But and the tube obviously is very heavily used by commuters and by tourists. And there, as you mentioned, there are no international tourists pretty much in London. That's a drag on the tube numbers. I think what will happen is we will get the return, we will get the end numbers that we're expecting over the course of the year, but the trajectory has been slower for the combination of things that I've just mentioned. We'll just keep going on all of the reassurance, and there are other things that people need to be reassured about. Ventilation, the hand sanitisation, the antibacterial thing, and we're using all of it, and we produce lots of collateral that firms themselves can just put in their internal communications and send to their own people. So I think it will build, but it's going to be building back at a trajectory which is slower than we saw. We've adapted TfL Go to include real-time busyness information in stations. We're really proud of it. You can see at any time using anonymised Wi-Fi ping data how busy your local station is, and that's helping spread the peak and enabling people to be confident in travelling. So I hope that helps, and we'll just keep monitoring everything.
It does help, and it's very helpful. Thanks for that. Bit more colour was great. I'm going to go to Mealing, Lynn, and Ben, and then last round, bullet 2. So Mealing first, if that's okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One comment and then ask a question on the issue of tackling unwanted sexual behaviour on our network and in the taxi and private hire trade. I welcome the recent actions being taken, and I hope that is actually sustained, particularly as the nights get darker and also with the forthcoming festivities and the return of night tube as well. However, I think the offences cited in the taxi and private hire trade are absolutely shocking. Not just the number of incidents, but the actual offences themselves. Obviously, the force of the law will be put on those found guilty in terms of the cab driver. But I do wonder what more can we do, particularly for the taxi and private hire operators, and what sort of sanctions or threat of sanctions do we have? Obviously, they are not doing enough. And I also note that we are developing a far-reaching and comprehensive program to improve the safety of women and girls in London and those obviously travelling on our network. My ask is also maybe, we need to bring this back, particularly to the safety panel, to particularly scrutinise the impact of that program when it's been implemented. I think there's a piece of work there for the safety panel to scrutinise as well. But like I say, on the taxi and private hire trade, I think those offences are absolutely shocking, and we should be able to do more with those operators.
Thanks, Mealing. Lynn.
Thank you, Sadiq. Two things. The first is that I just wanted to commend the really excellent briefing that we had from staff, from Alex and Lily Matson's team earlier this week, which was in the run-up to COP26. And they briefed us on the work that TfL is doing to reach the target that you've set, Chair, of net zero by 2030. And to say that I was really very, very heartened by the level of ambition that is sort of shown in the work that we're looking at, and by the fact that we're not taking a kind of narrow view of this and saying, well, this is only about our own tube trains and buses. We're looking at the whole piece, and I think that is so important, absolutely world leading. And it feels to me as though once in a few days' time we have ULEZ up and running, yeah, exactly, that has been massive, and I fully expect that it will be hugely successful because there's so much work that's gone into it. I think the question then is what next? And I think the answer to what next lies in the briefing that we had a few days ago about what we can do to reach net zero by 2030. And so I just wanted to say that I think that is hugely important and very significant, and I felt so proud of TfL and the way that we're embracing that challenge. So that's really more of a comment than a question. And my question is, in your report, Andy, there's some documentation of police action to enforce speed limits, with some very shocking speeding going on, very with even people caught driving at 100 miles per hour in London. You just wonder how that's possible. And also commentary on the introduction of 20 mile per hour speed limits, which is very, very welcome. I'd be grateful to know what opportunities there are for us to push forward the wider adoption of intelligent speed control, because it seems to me that that is the thing that will tackle both the enforcement in 20 mile per hour streets and the absolutely appalling speeding with huge kind of risk and danger associated with it that the police were picking up. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. Ben.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd just like to commend management on the Northern Line extension. I think it is an extraordinary achievement, and as a member of PIC, I know that's been a difficult, troublesome project at times. So I think it's particularly pleasing it's come in on time and within budget, and as you said, unlocked massive redevelopment of the area. So I just wanted to say it's an extraordinary achievement. A question I have is, I'm sure it's true of other board members, kind of anecdotally, I've seen a huge rise in e-scooters and e-bikes. And if I think about one trend that's really, in terms of transport, that's really surprised me over the last couple of years, it's been the rise of kind of e-scooters and e-bikes. And in particular, I just see a lot of, very dangerous, I don't know if driving is the right word, from people on e-scooters. I saw it last night coming through London, some shocking things, with people kind of crossing junctions and slipping through pavements. So I just wondered, do we have a broad strategy around e-bikes and e-scooters? And have we tried to look at, those means of transport in terms of kind of safety and how we might want to try and regulate that?
Sure. I'll just make some opening comments, if I may, and then colleagues just be ready to please assist with some detail. On Mealing, I'm just heads up, Howard, I'll just ask you to comment on particularly the legal issues around the cases that we've seen to date, and as you rightly say, the shocking number of offenders. Gareth may have a comment as well with the team that he works with. But absolutely, we take that very seriously. We want everyone to feel safe and to be safe on any mode on TfL. So we'll come back with some specifics while I give my colleagues time to have a little think. On Lynn, your points, that's great. Thank you for your kind comments around Alex and Lily's briefing. We have a huge level of ambition on the environment, and I made reference earlier to the vision and values work. Well, I'll just read out and note, Kate, can we please provide all board members with hard copy of that once the hard copies are done, because I'm very proud of it. But deliberately, our purpose is to move London forward safely, inclusively and sustainably. So you notice the word sustainable in there, and it came through loud and clear from our colleagues on the front line. They wanted that. Remember, it's built up from the bottom. It's not a design as is typically the fashion, as some sort of imposed document from the 11th floor in Palestra. This was their work. And then that's the purpose, but the vision is a strong green heartbeat for London. Back to that sustainable element. And in fact, one of the 4 roadmaps is a colleague roadmap, a customer roadmap, a finance roadmap. There's also a green roadmap, right? Again, with tangible actions. So we're very much focused on what I would say on your point about what comes next after ULEX, and Gareth may wish to comment. Well, I'll tell you one thing, and particularly with our colleague Becky here as a government representative, the biggest thing we can do, and I'll say it again, you know what's coming, is electrify the bus fleet. With everything that goes with it. An electrified bus fleet, 9,500 buses, the infrastructure paraphernalia that comes with it, push on and finish off the job of electrifying London's taxi fleet, which is what the Mayor was doing up in Coventry. And for that, though, we need to partner up with government on a long-term funding deal. And it makes so much sense because not only do we aid government in reaching their laudable objective of a decarbonised UK by 2050, you ain't getting that unless you electrify the London bus fleet, but you also create jobs in the UK, which is the whole point of economic recovery, and you hit the levelling up agenda because guess where those buses are made? Not in London, in Falkirk, in Ballymena, and in Guildford. You know, they're made around the country, so it makes so much sense, and that is the big ticket item for, as it seems to me, after ULEX. And then, Ben, thanks for your comments about the NLE. It's a shame Stuart's not here. I think he's watching. He drove that project across the line, including dealing with a lot of difficult issues as we went. I'll ask Gareth to answer on the e-scooters and e-bikes, but let's just say we're very alive to that. We have a much higher standard for our own e-scooter fleet. And I occasionally look out my window and see Gareth's people out there actually enforcing with the police illegal use of scooters on pavements and even on the roads. Actually, they're not supposed to be there. But colleagues, if we could go around the room then. Howard, comment on the taxi issue first.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, from an enforcement point of view, whenever we find out about issues, we take licensing action immediately, wherever we're able to do that. But also, more proactively, the latest improvements in the driver training modules that we're doing, which are reported in here, you know, a lot of that is designed to make sure that drivers understand the standards that are expected of them and appropriate behaviour, and also to help more generally with safeguarding and that kind of thing as well, because, you know, proactively they're in a position to be able to help. So, yeah, absolutely, we're doing everything that we can to try and drive up those standards. And there's a programme at the moment of quite a number of improvements from a safety point of view to the sort of training and safety regime that we're consulting on and that we'll be taking forward. So there's a lot of activity in that area.
Thank you. And I'll throw it to Gareth, if I may, to talk around maybe to make additional comments on how we enforce with your team and anything that Mariam wants to add on the safety perspective on scooters and also on speeding.
Thank you. So just on the enforcement side, so we do have trained officers that stop taxi and private hire vehicles in the street and check that they are, the person driving the vehicle is in fact the person who should be, that all the arrangements in place, that the vehicle is safe for use and so on. There is an obligation as part of the licensing process for private hire companies to ensure that they do have very accurate records of drivers, that the drivers' processes are properly maintained, and that, for example, those holding licenses, their photos, all of those are up to date on the app-based processes that people use. And we actually go and we audit those companies themselves periodically to check that the things that they say they're doing are actually happening. So there's quite a wide range of sort of physical interventions, if you like, to check where things are. Unfortunately, that does throw up issues, and we do find out from police colleagues and others about offences. And when that happens, then Howard's team take appropriate licensing action immediately and/or follow up on processes if there's any issue, and that may itself result in licensing action being taken with the private hire company, for example. So there's a lot of work going on, but we need to continue to do that. We also reference in the report the Safer Travel at Night programme, which is on the street at night, helping people understand how to safely use taxi and private hire. That includes making sure that touting isn't happening, but also education about looking for the driver's photo, making sure that there is the right safeguards in place and so on for those out and about using London's nighttime economy. So there's a lot of effort going on, and there'll be more happening through the winter and into the spring as well. But you're right to highlight it, and we do take it very, very seriously. On the Lynn, on your question about intelligent speed control, I think it's an excellent question. We are, of course, pushing forward for our own fleets, including for the wider bus fleet, and having that in place is a condition of all new buses entering into service under the safety programme that we have for buses. We also engage with fleet operators across London and more nationally who are putting in similar sorts of technology for their own purposes. And then again with the insurance trade, because they have a role to play here in ensuring that that if proper speed controls are put, that those are reflected, and therefore there's a business case for installing them and so on. But I think you're right, and I think we'll take away the fact that there might be more that we can do as part of our wider controls. As you know, we're controlling for things like direct vision standard and elsewhere in London, and we should take that away for investigation. And then Ben, on your point on e-scooters and e-bikes, I mean, you're absolutely right. So, you know, for the avoidance of doubt, it is not possible to ride a private e-scooter on a footway or on a highway anywhere. They are illegal. The only legal way of riding an e-scooter is in London through the trials that we have set up. Those trials are very carefully controlled. The standard of the vehicle is a much higher standard than you would typically find with a private hire. The speed is limited to quite a low level and lower still by geofencing in areas of high pedestrian usage and so on. And there are no-go areas where the scooters themselves will power down if they are taken into those areas. So far, we've got quite a large rollout working with our borough colleagues of that trial. So far, it's going very well. We've only had, to date, 7 serious injuries for riders on those scooters, and you'll see the statistics in the report around the thousands of trips that have been conducted there. It's also necessary on our scooter trials to have at least a provisional driving licence to undertake mandatory training, and the behaviour of the rider of the scooter and the hire of the scooter is of course monitored, and if the scooter is left in the wrong place or there's a complaint and so on, that can be followed up, and of course the ability then to hire a scooter can be removed. So we have got a plan for the trial. The trial is exactly that. It's a trial to see how well it works in London's street space. We get all of the data back from those operating the trial on our behalf, share those with the boroughs, and the plan is that working with government, if they bring forward legislation to legalise in certain ways scooters going forward, if they do that following the trial period, we're obviously putting forward to government our lessons learned from the trial as to how to safely then accommodate this new mode of transport within London. The same applies, of course, for e-bikes. E-bikes are limited in terms of their speed, so you can ride your own e-bike on our cycling facilities as you would a normal bike, and we are looking to enhance the Santander cycle scheme with an e-bike provision from the summer of next year. So there's quite a lot going on to embrace this. We do know that it is a mode of transport that is accessible to a number of Londoners. It does reach certain communities very well, and therefore we can't uninvent them, so we must make sure that they can be accommodated as safely as possible on our road network.
Okay, let's move on to Anne and then Greg.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of things from me. First of all, given that this is the first time, I think, since we've met since January 2020, to just reinforce what you and the Commissioner have said about what a fantastic job I think the whole of the organisation has done in terms of keeping the transport going over this period. So congratulations to everyone on that. Secondly, I take what Kay was saying about the safety, and I have to say I think that there's a group of people who maybe aren't working full time who haven't got onto the system and therefore don't think it's safe, and it's about getting that on. So the two things I keep telling everyone, because I've seen it on the posters on the tube, is that no virus has been found on the network throughout from the studies that have been taken, and also the air in the tube carriage changes every 3 minutes, and actually that actually gives them quite a lot of confidence in going forward. So I'm wondering how we could make those messages a bit more widespread in terms of the communication, because I'm sure you're feeding it into businesses, but it's the people who aren't going back into the office. So I have to say, on the Jubilee line coming in this morning, I think there was only one person on the carriage not wearing a mask, and I think they all look like commuters, so I think they were being much more strongly adhering to the rules than the more casual users of the system. Secondly, for me, on the report on page 36, can I say how glad I am to see the success of the first private prosecution for refusal to wear a face covering, and the fact that we are taking civil action where we can on that. So I think that's really good to move forward. And my question, it's not in the report, but I was wondering if someone could give us a bit of an update about the incident that happened at Enfield Town Station a week or so ago, just in terms of safety issues and whether there are any initial lessons learnt from it. Thank you.
Thanks. Greg, thanks for your patience. Your hand went up first and you got last. There are downsides being near to the chair, I'm afraid.
I'll take it. Chair, I also wanted just to begin in the way other colleagues have done by, I think, simply offering my respect for the very resilient and proud way that all of the staff at TfL have managed what has been, I think, an absolutely intolerable situation in the last 18 months. I think people have behaved with enormous dignity and professionalism, and I salute them for the work that they've done. Also, Mr Mayor, to congratulate you on becoming chair of the C40. That's going to be, I think, very exciting, very important role in the next period of time. And then there were 2 points I wanted to comment on and ask a question about. So I very much wanted to say to everyone, but particularly to Vernon, that I think the way that TfL has been managing the recovery programme has been absolutely exemplary. I've been working with a lot of organisations around the city in one way or another who are continuously using the TfL data, continuously using the TfL Go app, taking their lead from TfL about how the recovery is being shaped and managed and everything else. And I think TfL has been really showing leadership. And of course that has supported, Mayor, your Let's Do London campaign, which has been visibly very successful. And you can see that in the ridership pattern. So the question is really about the pattern of the recovery from here, I think. And I completely take the point that Vernon made very clearly, that domestic visitors and domestic workers, as it were, residents already, are the ones who are fueling the recovery. But we're still waiting for the full return to the office and the pattern that will take, the international tourists, international workers. And I think also the pattern of teaching in our 50 higher education institutions is having an effect on ridership, on the transport system as well. Many of these universities still working either fully digitally or now hybrid. So I think there are many factors that are affecting the character of the recovery in London that's different to the rest of the country, and I think you're seeing that in the numbers. So the question is, are we tracking these different elements of demand, and are we able to articulate them clearly in the conversation with government? Because it looks to me that the pattern of recovery in London will be slower to begin with, but eventually I think will be a deeper recovery in London in the longer term. So there's a lot, I think, to talk about there. And then the second thing was I wanted to pick up, as Ben did, to say that the Northern Line extension has been a project we've been following assiduously at the PIC, and a big salute to Stuart Harvey and the team for bringing it in the way you said, Commissioner. But I think the Commissioner's point that this project, more than any other, exemplifies the link between sustainable urban development and sustainable transport systems, with each cross-subsidising the other. I think it's a very important case study. And I would like us to make more of this if we possibly can, particularly as we begin to develop TfL's role in the property development side of the work. This is a way of both generating future ridership, creating more sustainable urban form, and enabling the built environment and the transport system to jointly pay for each other's underlying systems. I think it's a very important case study for us, and I really wanted to encourage us to use it more.
Okay. So, again, some opening comments. Gareth, put your notices for Enfield Town Update, please. Vernon, on the issues around the recovery, albeit we'll also cover recovery from a financial perspective in Simon's slot. Just a couple of comments from me, though. First up, thanks for all the kind comments. They're much appreciated. And, you know, the frontline staff and office colleagues do see these meetings, and that will be much appreciated that the board has indeed noticed these things. Just to your point, Greg, about the case study, the NLE is indeed a great case study of that. And that's why, again, we're making this this very strong case for sustained investment, because you know, we can play a huge part in the UK's recovery, not just London's, because London is the golden goose that creates the funds that then fuel levelling up across the whole of the UK. And it's slightly more nuanced in that as well, because there's lots more that we can do, like governments rightly with the Great British Railways initiative talking about rolling out the benefits that we enjoy of contactless travel. Well, we're the experts on that. We developed it. Shashi Verma developed it. So we're happy to help with that. We're happy to help with our expertise on bus contracting. We're happy to share learning with other colleagues around the country on the business cases that we produce, and then the benefits that accrue from the investment that we've just been talking about. We're ready to help. But my point is to government, please engage with us, because we've got all that expertise and we can absolutely hardwire that into a deal. I think that I'll limit my comments to that in the interest of time. So let's go to Vernon for commentary piece around the campaigns in terms of customer confidence. And maybe I've missed one point actually, which you want to comment on in terms of safety on the network from the perspective of women and girls.
Thanks, Andy. And to Anne's points, and we've used radio a lot to reach into the homes of people that might not necessarily be travelling. Plus we have 4.5 million strong database, and people actually read our stuff with all of these messages in them. So we are trying to reach the people that aren't necessarily travelling, and we've produced this whole range of collateral, as I mentioned. Businesses are really important here. It's not just telling the businesses, it's asking the businesses to use our materials. And for example, there is a video on ventilation, which in a really straightforward way communicates how it's possible, even on deep tube lines, to have fresh air every 2 to 3 minutes. So we are really asking business to help us to communicate to their own workforces and to wear face coverings and so on. I think Greg's questions, we're absolutely hearing Greg and get it. And Alex is, while we're sort of, some of us have been dealing with the near term, I've asked Alex to look at the longer term, the medium and longer term, to see how the city is actually developing. And I think there are several factors, some of which you touched upon. On workers, I think part of the short-term issue is that firms are having to adapt their office buildings to accommodate people. I mean, we've experienced this ourselves. And it's quite difficult, actually, coming from where we've been to organising it in a way where you can really start getting people back. I think there's also a question about how the office accommodation market will adapt. The commission, Greg, that you were on, looking at the central activity zone, offered up the theory that what you might see is actually more people setting up offices in London on a part-time basis. So you end up getting more people travelling, but less often. But that will still drive ridership. And we're seeing some of that in the way in which office buildings are adapting. We're keeping in very close touch with the education sector. We're also looking at what's happening in other cities, both in the UK and elsewhere, and actually the patterns we're seeing in other cities are very similar. If you look at New York, who are a bit behind us actually on patronage, it's not a criticism, it's just every city is different. We're seeing similar themes emerge. I think there's also probably something about demographics. Younger people want to be in the office, particularly if you're just starting work, to get experience and skills and so on. That's going to be a big driver. And I think similar arguments go towards education as well. But also some people, particularly on the National Rail Network, haven't had to pay for travel for a while either. So the adaptation of the fares and ticketing system on the national railways is going to be important to encourage more people to come in and use our services. So we're keeping an eye on all of that stuff. And finally, it's just going back to, sorry, on a different subject, Andy, if that's all right, just going back to Mei Ling's point about the safety of women and girls. Just to say, Mei Ling, that on top of trying to design safety in from the very beginning in everything that we do, there is a specific campaign starting on the 27th of October about sexual harassment on public transport, and it's in partnership with the Rail Delivery Group, the British Transport Police and the Met, and it's pointing out all of the things that are never okay to experience on the network, and it's targeted at the perpetrators, but it's also encouraging those who are subject to this sort of thing to report it as well. But it's pretty hard-hitting stuff, and it's targeted at the people that perpetrate this stuff. So that's on top of designing safety in from the very beginning.
Do you want to say something? Go for it, Alex.
I was just going to come in on Greg's point about the Northern Line extension. I think you're absolutely right. It's a great achievement, and we are reviewing the benefits of that scheme. I remember working on the original business case in 2008, and at the time we thought we might, at a stretch, get 16,000 homes with the tube. We will now get north of 20,000, probably 22,000, I think, at the end of it. So I think we are reviewing what we predicted originally, but I think that it is indicating initial things. We under-predicted. We were too cautious at that time. And I just think that's quite interesting as a lesson for future infrastructure projects and shows how powerful they can be in levering in all of that housing that we need in the city.
Okay, look, can I thank you all for your comments and questions. I've got a few things to say as a chair. Look, one of our roles is to, of course, challenge the top team, but to support them as well. And I've got to say this, I mean, I genuinely think the last 18 months have been the hardest for our city since the Second World War. And they've been the hardest for the transport sector, I think, ever. And can I just put on record my thanks to Heidi, who has been working 7 days a week, often from 4:35 a.m. to see what's going on during the rush hour, to see what's going on, particularly during the pandemic, to address challenges, and working her socks off, both supporting, but sometimes challenging, the transport team, but also Andy as our commissioner. We forget Andy began his job during the pandemic. Many of you, some of you, it's the first time you're meeting him, is today in person. But to take over Transport for London in the midst of a pandemic, and Andy works with 70 to 8,000 transport workers across our city. Many of them have not had the benefit of meeting him. And he hasn't just hit the ground, running, he's hit the ground flying. And I think all of us should put on our record our thanks to Andy and Heidi and the team for their incredible work over the last 18 months. I'm incredibly proud to work with you. And I think our city is very lucky to have both of you, so thank you both very, very much. A couple of things to say by other comments raised across the course of today. Okay, your question was spot on in relation to the issue of public transport usage going forward, and Becky and Andrew are seized of that as well from the government perspective. I'm not going to use the acronym for those who work on a Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday in the office for obvious reasons, but it's a challenge for us. And we are working, as Vernon says, really hard with our friends, employees and stuff to try and address some of the challenges that faces. But what we don't want to do is get to the situation where the virus is so bad the government has to do a plan B, bringing back face masks. In France and Germany, they've got fewer positive cases, a similar amount of vaccines because they do wear face masks, in my view. And so we're trying to persuade the government now to bring in face masks to reduce the conditions, get into a situation where we need plan B, because if it gets to plan B being introduced, one of the terms of plan B is work more from home, right? So we may have face masks on public transport, but more people are working from home, and so there's no benefit to us. I've got to challenge one thing Andy said, which is unlike me. He mentioned, not challenge, a big part of it, something that Andy said prompted me, is at the opening of 9 Elms and Battersea Power Station, and he's right, it was flawless. Right? There was an occasion during the morning where Andy was too far from me, and I was about to do media interviews, and somebody brought to my attention the mistakes on the names of the station, and I had a panic because I'm about to do media. Apparently, the mistake was, why hadn't we called it Battersea Power Station?
Yes.
And that's the only issue raised. You'll be pleased to know.
I will do better.
And so, but it was a great opening, and Ben, I think you're spot on. I think Ben, the point you made is important though. It's because of the challenging on PIC, and because of the questions asked, and because Stuart addressed them and so forth on time, within budget and stuff. That shows the difference having a good board, supporting but challenging makes as well. And we'll be talking shortly about Crossrail, and you'll hear the great progress made since we took it over, that Mark will be talking to as well. Final point before I move off this item is, we mustn't, and none of you do, underappreciate what a big deal the ULEZ starting in 2019 was. And when I speak to colleagues around the world, thank you for your kind comments about C40, nobody's tried to do it, let alone done it. And speaking privately to other colleagues who rely upon their jobs through the votes of their citizens, they think I'm, in quote unquote, bonkers for trying to expand it 18 times what it currently is. It'll cover 4 million people. These are bold plans from TfL, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed, because I was speaking to the chief executive of Capita, who have businesses across the globe, and he was saying it's the biggest operation they've been involved in, but anybody they know's been involved in relation to migration of data, the use of the cloud. Andy mentioned the cameras and so forth. So this is big cheese, and we'll be around all weekend, Andy,
Sure.
making sure that but just so you know, we've got operatives working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for at least a month post October 25th to make sure any issues, I know there won't be Alex, Gareth, any issues are addressed in real time and stuff. So, you know, we should be incredibly proud of ULEZ, but the expansion takes us to a different level. So keep a close eye on that. So thank you all very, very much. We're asked to note the report from the Commission. Is that a quick?
I think Gareth was going to say
I
something
beg,
about
I'm so
Enfield
sorry,
Town.
Gareth.
Okay, just on Enfield Town then, so, and you rightly raised it, so there was an incident on the 12th of October, about 8:20 in the morning, where a London Overground train at slow speed entered Enfield Town station and didn't stop in time and collided with the buffers at the end of the platform. That caused the train, the front carriage of the train to ride up and partially derail. Thankfully, there were no injuries requiring hospital treatment. The driver was treated for shock. There was at least one other minor injury, but nothing that required anything other than treatment at the scene. So we're very thankful for that. There is obviously an investigation underway. The Rail Accident Investigation Board, as you would imagine, is looking at this, and we referred it, of course, to the ORR and to other relevant authorities. It's too early to say about root cause as part of those investigations. Just one thing to say, though, that we, our colleagues in our emergency response unit attended to be able to sort the train out and to address any infrastructure issues alongside Network Rail, and just a shout out to them because they do this day in, day out, for instance, across our network, and the services were restored by the following morning, so a very good recovery there. But obviously a full investigation, any lessons learned, will bring that back, particularly to the safety panel, I think, as those investigations conclude.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Gareth. We're asked to note the Commissioner's report. Is that agreed? Let's move swiftly on to the Elizabeth Line operational readiness and Crossrail update. Andy's already talked a bit about that during his report, so I'll go straight, if that's okay, Mark, over to you in relation to how we're doing. Mark.
Hi everybody, morning, afternoon. It is nice to be together again, isn't it, in this room. So a good point to take pause on Crossrail and just discuss where we are. Start with safety as ever. So in calendar year 21, we've actually had very positive safety trends. We've had 3 relatively minor injuries all of this year compared to 13 the previous year. And last year was our best safety year for some time. So this is a process of leadership, really, safety. And we're very proud of our progress towards Target Zero. And it shows we could actually deliver the programme with no harm at all. We've actually had, in this calendar year, 24 weeks where we've had no harm and no high potential near misses, and that's, as Mark would know, in the transition to ROGS in March this year, that was a very, very challenging thing to do, to go from 10 years of a construction programme to an operational railway. So safety-wise, we are ever vigilant, but we're pleased and actually very proud of our workforce and supply chain to deliver that outcome. COVID remains in our organisation and supply chain, but we've got all of our protections in place. 15 people today are affected somewhere by COVID in a workforce of over 3,000. So the pingdemic that affected everybody, I think, in transportation over the summer certainly affected us, but didn't harm the programme. And certainly we stay ever vigilant with COVID, but at the moment under control. So safety-wise, we would say we're in a positive position, and we aim to close the programme out strongly at our Target Zero ethos. So where are we? So we transitioned to an operational railway in March. We've now commissioned all 3 ends of Crossrail. So Crossrail actually has 3 connections to the National Rail, the Great Western, the Great Eastern. A couple of weeks ago we commissioned the North Kent interface. So Crossrail and the Elizabeth Line is fully plumbed into National Rail now and operational as a railway. And you can even look at it on TrackerNet if you want to see our trains running around. We are 5 or 6 months into trial running, quite deep into it now, and it's a good time to communicate where we are. We've commenced the countdown to the start of trial operations. Trial operations is the very final phase of Crossrail before the opening, and trial operations is a dress rehearsal. It is a series of very, very well planned scenarios and exercises, both mass evacuation and individual exercises. And you really cannot enter trial operations until you've almost got the railway at its revenue quality status, and we're certainly converging on that as we speak. More on that in a moment about what the date of when that'll be. If you stand back from the programme, I think we're in a very positive space. 8 of the 10 stations are now fully commissioned. Abbey Wood became the final one to integrate a couple of weeks ago. The 2 stations that remain, Bond Street has achieved what we call SC2 configuration, which means Bond Street can now support revenue service, which is a big win for the programme. We've also handed over all of the urban realm at Bond Street to the oversight developer. So Bond Street is now really on a trajectory for completion. The plan we had over several years now to decouple Bond Street from the main effort of the railway has proven to be a very good one, because the Bond Street team now can press on with some urgency to try and see if they can indeed get all or some of Bond Street in with the opening of the railway. Who knows if they can do it, but by decoupling it, we've given Bond Street and the railway the best chance for that point of convergence. Canary Wharf, we are a matter of small number of weeks away now from the final integration. As we all know, Canary Wharf's been a really big challenge to get it to a certain standard. We will have we will have Canary Wharf handed over to Transport for London probably by the end of November, if not the end of November, certainly before Christmas. So I think we can say station shafts and portals are no longer any impediment or will not stop this railway coming into life, which of course is a big change over the years that I've been doing this job. That brings us to the routeway and the progression to trial operations. We would very much like to enter trial operations at the end of November. That is our target. Some conditions have to exist to get there, because when this railway opens, we've talked about Northern Line extension being flawless. Well done to that team. We need the same thing in the Elizabeth Line. So the entry to trial operations is a very sensitive thing, and a few things have to exist for that to come to pass. First thing is we are in the middle, right as we speak, of the ELR 100 commissioning. It's gone very well. We are dropping ELR 100 software, which is a combination of Siemens and Alstom software, which will support revenue service. It's gone very well. Today is multi-train squadron testing, and we expect it to be successful. And this weekend, the railway will be handed back to the operators with ELR 100 uploaded. And that software has literally taken a year to write. And we're very confident in it. But you never know until you actually hand it back at the weekend. Once it's back with the operator at the weekend, starting on the 27th of October, they are back into trial running. And that'll be, we really need to see how that goes. ELR 100 fixed a lot of the defects that we knew about. But as I say always, until you see the software in real life with the real systems, you don't really know. But we should be very confident. So all being well, next week we will restart trial running and see how the software is performing. The other thing we've been doing over the summer, while we've been doing trial running, we've been completing the integration testing in the routeway that you could only complete when you had the railway all together. That is now coming to an end. It's been very successful. We're very pleased with the infrastructure we've got. We have, of course, generated a small number of things, particularly around the tunnel ventilation system, that will need to be tuned and tweaked. Out of thousands and thousands of things to test, we're down to 4 or 5 things to fix, but they're important. And that's why, of course, we went through such an extensive testing process. So at Christmas, we will complete the final tweaks that we need to integrate the railway. So the question we have is, are we ready to enter trial operations at the end of November? At the moment, we don't know. We're progressing well. We need to see the software next week. We need to see the safety assurance work come in. It's on a good, solid trajectory. But as ever, the early part of our window is entirely possible, achievable, a target, but we have a risk provision because until we actually integrate this railway, we don't really know. So I guess we'll know in the next 2 or 3 weeks whether we can get into trial ops by the end of November. If we don't get in by the end of November, we won't be far away, to be honest. But it's very important we enter trial operations solidly, because from that moment on, the operator conducts a series of operations and the railway is pretty much complete. So I think the big picture of the Elizabeth Line is we're at a state of great completion now. We need to see the software next week coming through. There are further tuning up to do around the Christmas period that we are very clear about. Until they are done, though, you couldn't say definitively. We've been caught out before in this programme about being over-optimistic, but we are very, very near the end now, and I know how the desperation and the pull to get this done, but as Andy and I talk about every single day, when we open this railway, people will be able to rely upon it, and it will be reliable. We know it's safe. We need to get the reliability right. It is the world's largest digital railway ever created, and of course it takes some tuning up to get it right, but we are very near the end now, and certainly our opening window of February to June next year, we should be very confident in, very, very confident, and we will do our very, very best to get as close to the front edge of that as we can, and obviously the next couple of months will determine whether that's actually possible. A couple of final things from me. On the surface, our eastern and western railways are actually running very, very well. I think they are. Gareth will know better than me. They're probably second in the league table behind Merseyrail, I think. We're getting more and more full-length units in the eastern section, which is really good. And in the west, I think all of the step-free stations are complete in the west, with Hayes and Harlington being the last one, which is a great outcome, which only leaves us with Ilford and Romford to complete in the early part of next year, which I know Andy and the CEO of Network Rail talk about. So we are in a state of great completion. We need now just to tune up the system, hold our nerve, and make sure that we enter trial operations with the system that the operators can practice on. And if we do that, we are going to open this railway. We're very close. Very final thing for me, HS2 launched its Learning Legacy last week, which was a big deal for HS2. I don't know if people are fully aware, but our Learning Legacy came from the back of London 2012, and our Learning Legacy forms the basis of HS2's Learning Legacy. So this progression of mega program information and learning is going into HS2, which is good. And we are completing our Learning Legacy right now. All of the lessons of the past 3 years, the system integration, the convergence of the train software, how we restage the railway, is now currently being uploaded into the Learning Legacy. So, and I think there's a big appetite actually around the world for the lessons of Crossrail. Our AFCDC has remained unchanged. Plenty opportunities for that to come down, but at the moment we really need to see the retirement of risk, which is mostly about prolongation and the quality of the software, which we will know pretty much by the end of this calendar year. And very finally, the process of demobilisation of the Tier 1s has commenced. By the middle of January, all Tier 1s who will not be continuing will be demobilised. And we would not do that if we weren't very confident that we've got the work finished. There is still work to do on the Elizabeth line, but that's much more appropriately done by TfL, by London Underground, and a variety of Tier 2 partners. So that's quite a big deal. So by the time we get to the middle end of January, we should have quite a lean organisation that will continue throughout, of course, 2022, as the railway goes from a singular 12 trains an hour railway to the ultimate goal, which is 24 trains an hour joined with East and West. And that step is still a considerable technological challenge, but it starts with getting the base right. Is that okay?
Questions or comments? I only see Julian. We'll do Anne first, then Ben, then Julian. That's okay, Julian, because
Okay, I was just going to say that, you know, a lot of really, really good work has gone on this. But I am going to be the pessimist here. This is now the most complicated part of the whole process, and we really do need to make sure that we've ticked all the boxes before we go into trial operations. And although we're tantalisingly close, we do need to make sure that we have got everything sorted out before we take that next step. But you know, I think the timescales that you've talked about, as you say, are possible, but there is a lot of risk against those earlier dates, so we need to be very pragmatic about it. And I also just wanted to say that I had the privilege of going through the tunnel on the train from Paddington to Liverpool Street a few weeks ago with Heidi, and it is going to be such an asset to the capital. It is going to be brilliant when it's open. But we need to make sure that it sort of opens in the right way and that we get it open as soon as possible in the right circumstances. But it's going to be great when it gets here.
Ben?
Thank you, Chair.
Mark, can we take all three? Then is that okay?
Sure. Ben. I don't want to, I know there's a long way to go, so I don't want to count our chickens before they're hatched, but on the kind of learning legacy point, I found, learning about Crossrail has been really instructive for me and really helpful for me in terms of understanding risk of big projects. A little bit like the point on the Northern Line extension, I think it's really important when we do get to a successful outcome here, that we really think about how we make sure this knowledge is really understood and spread all around the country, not just within the industry, but all around the country. We're trying to, to have a massive infrastructure expenditure in this country to kind of get to that challenge for net zero. So I think that when we do get there, really important point, and that comes back again to kind of levelling up. It comes back to kind of helping the national economy. It comes back to how TfL can actually help other institutions around the UK and around the world. So I just think that point will be really important, because this has been the most phenomenally complicated project, and we have learned so much, and we must make sure we capitalise upon that learning.
Jim.
2 points. At the Audit and Assurance Panel in September, we had in the report there's some concerns about the level of numbers of trains at trial running, trying to get to the 12 simultaneously operating. And I wondered if you could just say a little bit more about that, Mark. And obviously I think the new software will address some of those challenges that you've had in the last month on that. But I think that getting to that 12 per hour was a challenge in order to get to trial operations. So a little bit more on that. Second point is a positive congratulations one, both on the step-free access for those stations in the west and hopefully not too much longer in the east, and also to say that the people of Southall are delighted that we've kept the Punjabi signs, and there would have been a riot if those Punjabi signs were not kept. First Great Western once made that mistake, and they quickly reversed. So brilliant that that's been done. But again, it's that point that I've made earlier about how you can kind of localise the kind of exterior of the stations so that they've got that local ownership. But that's a brilliant. The Punjabi signs in Southall are a brilliant example of that.
And Julian, both Mark and Andy are well aware that our friends in Tower Hamlets at Whitechapel won Bangla signs at Whitechapel, and they're on the case. Mark, did you do all three?
I mean, Anne raises the most important point, really, that after spending so long to get to this point, we're not going to mess it up now. And when we go into trial operations, it's very important. It's the operator's railway. You can imagine what we do, mass evacuations and things like recovering trains. It's not a time for the project. Equally, if we've only got a few things missing that we could collect on the way, you wouldn't want to wait. So that's the very, very careful balance. But by far the most determinant thing is whether we see next week, after the commissioning, how the system actually runs, because you really must start trial operations correctly. So you're exactly right, Anna. After all of this wait, if we had to wait another small amount of time to get it exactly right, it'd be worth it. But having said all of that, we have also learned that keeping the pressure on the front end drives the right behaviour and the right can-do spirit. But we will not be doing anything at this point, the most sensitive moment. Learning legacy, great point, Ben. I mean, it's quite a thing, the Crossrail learning legacy, and it came directly from London 2012. And if you look at HS2, they've taken it completely to a different level. In terms of our learning legacy and completing it, our main route through it is the IPA roadmap for all government projects, so it's connected right the way through with DFT and all manner of capital expenditure with the government. I think one very important bit of our learning legacy, pertaining to what the Mayor and the Commissioner said, is out of 75,000 people who worked on Crossrail, the vast majority were never in London. They were in our supply chain in Bedford, in Newcastle, in the Isle of Wight. So I think particularly the learning legacy about procurement, design, localisation, manufacture, value creation outside of the project, including the housing market, is crucial. So yeah, we aim to, certainly I aim before I leave this job, to put a bow around the learning legacy as something that is usable for everybody. 12 TPH was a real challenge, Julian. The ops team were dealing with a system that was inherently had bugs in it. You know, the ELR 100 drop right now fixes 300 bugs. 300. It's a huge uplift in capability. So how the ops team got around it, and I'm sure Andy would agree, genius work really. They found a way of starting slowly during the day. They did the first couple of hours at 8 trains an hour, made sure the wheels were stable, and then they stepped it up to 12 because they found that most of our bugs occurred when trains became stationary. So they kind of, like a flywheel, they got the system going and then they stepped it up. And we've had many days at 95 to 98% mileage accumulation. Of course, the reliability's been poor because of the known bugs. So I'm sure Anne and the Deputy Mayor were on a good day, weren't you? You saw a good day. So yes, 12 TPH does exist, it is possible. We need this software drop to fix the bugs because we are not near a passenger quality railway yet, but there'll be an acid test for us next week. But yeah, we found a way of repeatedly doing 12 TPH, and this system should eat up 12 TPH because it's built for something much bigger. So I think we'll be okay if the software comes through, which we will know soon enough.
Okay. If there's anything else, can I just thank Mark, you and the team, and Andy. You know, it can't be nice waking up to Andy every morning.
It is the second face I see every morning after my wife.
I can't think of worse things. I mean, Heidi is the chair of the Elizabeth Line Committee, brings me up to speed with things on a regular basis. I'm disappointed, Heidi. I wasn't told what a multi-train squadron testing was. And it's new to me, Mark. I'll tell Heidi afterwards, but I'm sure we're all desperate to know what that is. We're asked to note the update from Mark, and I know the colleagues will be keeping up to date offline, as well as through the committee that Heidi chairs as well. Is that agreed? Great, thanks. Let's move on to the finance report. Simon, up to you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm shortly going to ask Patrick to give us a summary of the finance report for the period for Q2, which ended on the 18th September, and that's measured against the revised budget that you approved as a board in July 2021. And then I'll go on after we've done the report and any questions on it to give a little bit of an update about the discussion we had at Finance Committee about our comprehensive spending review submission and where we are currently in the process around our funding. But before I hand over to Patrick, I just wanted to sort of hit the highlights for you. So really, we are continuing to focus on the things that we can control, and the report demonstrates the firm grip we continue to have on our operating costs, which are 2% below budget. And we've already begun to talk a little bit about the demand factors, which Patrick will cover in a bit more detail, with the help of some graphs, I think, which will also help address some of the questions that the panel have. Now, importantly, as we all know, it is the uncertainty over demand that means the funding deals we currently have with government, where government is taking the revenue risk on passenger demand, but not the revenue risk on ULEZ or our media income or any of our other sources of income, that it's so critically important that this revenue risk continues after the deal ends on the 11th of December, and we'll come back to that later on. So I'm going to hand over now to Patrick to take us through the highlights, and then we'll talk a little bit more, as I said, about the funding thereafter.
Okay, well, we'll jump straight to revenue, given that it is the largest factor in our finances, and we've included some more detailed analysis of our journey and revenue trends on slides 10 and 11 of the finance pack. And as shown on slide 10, period 6 saw total TfL journeys at 66% of pre-pandemic levels, up from 59% in period 5. And the revised budget, which is the light shaded lines on those charts, you can see in each of those charts we had assumed a significant step change in demand from mid-July following step 4 of the government's roadmap. That was our best estimate at the time, but we had very limited information, and we had the impact of the very late change to the timing of that step 4 by government. And that budget, that forecast at that point in time, was very similar to the government's own forecasts, which we shared and cross-calibrated. But as we talked about during the Commissioner's report, That 4-week delay to step 4 did not have a linear impact on demand, particularly the return to the office. That's partly due to the government's own advice about a cautious return to the office and the natural impact of being close to summer and going through the summer holiday period. That meant we saw relatively little impact initially. But we have seen that more significant increase in more recent times, particularly in September, but we remain below the budgeted levels across the rail modes, LU, rail and the TfL rail. But you can see demand on buses is very close to budget. And that has a lower proportion of that office-based demand, and that again shows that actually we forecast the other key factors broadly right. Vernon mentioned the more recent trends we observed in period 7 in our discussion earlier, and if that more recent trend continues, as Vernon said, it is perfectly possible we will hit that expected level of journeys just over a slightly longer timescale, given that change to step 4 and how that's worked. But there are some risks to that. So our journey forecast in the budget, again, you can see in those light blue, lighter lines, that we are forecasting a level of winter demand suppression, which could alter that recent trend and divert from that trend that we observed. That could be due to an organic natural response to people's behaviour change over cold and flu season, poorer weather, darker nights. But it also could be due to changing government guidance that could result in that. The extent and timescale of that is, of course, extremely uncertain. In the budget, we forecast that to begin from at the end of October, and journeys drop from expected 80% to just over 60% at the end of December. But that's followed by a sustained steep recovery as we come out of winter and into the spring. But there are a wide range of potential outcomes given all the uncertainties and the variables that underpin those. And as Simon said, that uncertainty highlights the criticality of the extension to the revenue true-up mechanism beyond the end of our current funding agreement on 11th of December. There's a bit more detail on the LU recovery trends on slide 11. That shows an overall positive picture. Overall demand is more than double the level we saw in February 2021. We see the pattern of inner and outer suburbs recovering the most strongly, and rail terminuses and city stations are seeing increases, but less significantly, given the impact, again, of office demand. Weekend travel, does that seem more stronger than weekday? And all that data reinforces our hypothesis that it's the return to the office that's driving that slightly slower than expected return, whilst leisure, hospitality, retail and other sectors are returning quicker. And whilst it's great news that weekend demand is strengthening, it is worthwhile remembering that that's historically, weekend demand is historically responsible for approximately a quarter of journeys and 3/4 on the weekdays. Now, not shown on this slide, but there's a similar geographical trend in the recovery of bus demand. So recovery on buses has been stronger in outer London, where we're back to 77% of pre-pandemic demand. Next, inner London, 74%, and then slightly lower in central London, where we're at 70%. So you can see that again, that geographical disparity, and that aligns with the pattern of planned service changes that Gareth mentioned earlier. So that's the key picture on revenue. If we move through what the impact that has on our finances, on slide 12, that brings that revenue impacts together, where we've got a combination of lower revenue, 101 million lower than budget, but offset by lower operating costs, 67 million lower than budget, and lower capital renewals. That results in a £4 million adverse variance to net cost of operations before government funding the revenue true-up. So actually relatively close to our core budget in the round. Compared to last year, that's £540 million better than the same position last year. That's driven by the increases in passenger revenue and other operating income. And due to that revenue true-up mechanism, the shortfall in passenger revenue is being offset, as you can see at the bottom of that table, by extraordinary revenue grant, meaning the overall bottom line position is £117 million favourable to budget. On slide 13 goes into a bit of detail about how we're making those operating cost savings, a combination of underlying cost improvements, where we have lower staff costs and lower contracted costs, some timing difference, and a difference on contingency. And contingencies is held in the budget given the risks that we're facing on non-fares operating income and our operating costs. And I'll return to that in a bit more detail shortly. Slide 14 has the overview of the capital spend, and total capital spend excluding Crossrail is 559 million. That's 72 million pounds lower than budget, but 133 million higher than last year when we paused projects in the first half of last year during the safe stop. And the project spend is lower across most programmes, and again the key factor we're struggling here is the stop-start nature of funding agreements, which impact our ability for us to plan ahead, our supply chain partners to plan ahead, and the boroughs to plan ahead in the projects they deliver on our behalf. But the most important slide is the last slide in the pack on cash balances, that's slide 16. So I'll just spend a few minutes going through this. So cash balances at the end of period 6, just over 1.7 billion, which is 57 million lower than revised budget. But what that shows at the bars is that our cash have remained stable since we finalised that funding agreement with government. However, the dark blue elements of those bars show what our cash would have been in the absence of that funding agreement. This shows in the absence of that funding support, we would now have run out of cash at this point in the year. What those light blue bars also show is that the government funding support in the current funding arrangement period has been front-loaded. We've received 80% of the base funding up until the end of quarter 2, with only 20% coming in the final 3 periods. Now, we agreed a front-loaded schedule as we had very little time to work through how that profile was going to be set in the funding agreement. We had 3 days over a bank holiday weekend to replan a funding profile very different from the original budget you approved as a board. So we took the prudent approach of ensuring that income came in front-loaded, so we had time to respond, work through the savings, and work through that revised budget. But it's only when we had that revised budget that we determined the yellow line, which shows that our forecast cash would be relatively stable for the first half of the funding agreement period before declining when the rate of government funding declines. So once we adjust for the true-up mechanism, where we expect to have to pay back some money to government at the end of the funding deal, we will be very close to our minimum cash requirement of 1.2 billion on the 11th of December as the current funding arrangement expires. The forecast beyond that point assumes no further government support, which is why it dips below that level. That shows in the absence of further government funding, our cash balances will drop to 700 and 800 million, between 700 and 800 million by year end. It's around 500 million lower than our minimum cash requirement of 1.2 billion. And that is the element of government funding that we are seeking as part of our revised budget. But as our risk environment is increasing, that highlights the importance of that contingency we had in our budget and the fact that we need to rebuild our cash reserves above 1.2 billion, because the only way we can respond to risks in the short term. Just highlighting a couple of those risks, we've talked about the amazing positive impact the ULEZ expansion will have from Monday in terms of London's air quality and the impact that will have on public health. And the scheme's clearly designed to improve air quality, but in the short term, it will generate a net revenue stream as compliance improves and behaviour changes. And as that scheme covers this new, larger zone, we've got a significant uncertainty of the level of volumes, the precise level of compliance, and the proportion of non-compliance vehicles that fail to correctly pay the charge. And we're doing everything we can to raise awareness of the scheme and support people to do the right thing and comply with the scheme. But we have to make a set of financial assumptions about people's behaviour, and that's, again, it's based on the best information we have, but the actual level of net revenue is extremely uncertain. And until the scheme goes live on Monday and we start to get that actual observed data about the real positive impact it's having on London's air quality, we won't know for sure. And we have to have an element of contingency to manage if income comes in lower, because it's having even greater impact on air quality than we expected. We're also all well aware the economy is experiencing inflationary pressures, particularly on fuel costs. Our contractual positions and the fact that we forward purchase our energy means that in the short term, that's had a relatively limited impact on our costs. But we're starting to see that feed through into a cost base, and that will really increase over the next 12 months. And finally, of course, as we talked about throughout, future income from passenger journey remains a significant risk. And whilst in the short term we have that revenue true-up mechanism, and we want that to continue and expect that to continue, at some point that will come to an end. And we need to rebuild our cash reserves to be able to absorb a much larger volatility in passenger demand in future than we experienced pre-pandemic. So those risks highlight the importance of that rigour that Simon mentioned, continued tight control of operating costs, being really careful about our capital expenditure, and driving these efforts to support London's recovery post-pandemic. And we're doing everything we can as an organisation, as a management team, but we will need government support, further government support, post 11th of December, if we continue to support London's recovery and the country's recovery from the pandemic. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. And just, Chair, before we open the questions, just very quickly, so just to give a couple more examples of the importance of rebuilding those cash reserves. You'll remember as a board pre-pandemic, when we were facing average annual demand fluctuations of 2 to 3%, and the prospect of a Brexit risk of around 10 to 11%, that we agreed to increase our cash balances to around £2 billion in order to be the only form of loss absorption that we have. The reason we hold 2 months minimum cash at all times is not because that is the safety net to dip into when something goes wrong. It is because it takes us a few months, normally, when we have established with government that there is a need for emergency funding, to work through those funding agreements, and that we can continue to pay our people and our suppliers as we work through those periods. We therefore need to hold cash over and above the minimum 1.2 billion, sized to the strategic risks we see as a board and as an exec, because without equity and without any other structural funding mechanism from government, cash is the only liquid asset we have. To put that into perspective, in our accounts as at the 31st of March 2021, we had current liabilities of 3.7 billion and current assets of 2.4 billion, of which 1.7 billion was cash and the only liquid element. So in a normal business, you would expect to fully cover your current liabilities. Recognising TfL's access to support from government, but also to facilities like the Public Works Loan Board, our lenders and rating agencies allow us to hold lower minimum cash balances. But clearly, with the structure that we currently have, we have to have sufficient cash to be able to be sustainable going forward. And one of the key elements we'll have to determine with government in coming months is what level of financial shock will TfL have to absorb post-April 2023. That will be a key determinant of the level of cash and other facilities that we'll need to have in order to be able to say that, absent another pandemic of this size or scale, TfL may be expected to on its own, absorb a shock of 10, 15, perhaps 20% of demand, but our cash balances will have to allow us to do that. And we'll just pause there and hand over to questions from the board.
That's very helpful, Patrick and Simon. Thank you all very much. Questions or comments? So Mark first, then Mealing.
Thank you very much, Chair. I suppose the lesson that the pandemic's taught boards is to plan for the worst and double it. Picking up on Simon's last point there, I think it would be helpful to understand perhaps more in the near term as to, perhaps not the detail, but to get assurance that you are doing work in terms of if Plan B, if we can call it that, were to be triggered perhaps in, say, December, but probably more interesting for us is January. What steps we might need to take in order to do that, because obviously you've reflected your best assumption in the July budget in terms of lower demand in the winter period, but potentially we ought to be thinking, well, is that sufficient enough cover, or should we be doing more? And I think an understanding what action you would take or need us to take would be really helpful. Thank you.
We'll do one more Mealing and then we'll come. Mealing.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I completely agree with Simon about his points about cash balances. I think people really mistake that having some cash balances that we are awash with cash. And I think it's a crazy way to run a transport business with such a precarious risk in terms of cash balances. So I hope that that message needs to go back to central government in terms of our negotiations for the next round of hopefully some more funding. My question is to do with slide 13. First of all, congratulations and well done to the top team for a tight grip on the operating costs. And I think, you know, for this period, 67 million is no mean feat. And certainly the underlying cost of 30 million is better than expected. Again, that's been a tough effort. I note that much of this is driven by staff cost reduction. What I need to get reassurance from is whether some of this underlying cost reduction is actually a recurring one, and also in terms of how does it actually reflect into the reduction of permanent headcount. Because I think in the past reports we've actually had a bit more information and data on headcount, whether it's the temporary headcount and the permanent headcount in terms of our workforce. So that's my one question. My second question is in terms of the issue of inflation, can you remind me on the forecasting, what assumptions did we build in on inflation, seeing that inflation is actually going up?
Thank you. So I'll start to address these, and perhaps Patrick will confirm the inflationary assumption in the budget. So first of all, Mark, we're currently working on a revised forecast because we need to submit to you the GLA budget for the next financial year. We will reforecast our revenue forecast for the remainder of this financial year and the whole of next financial year when we do that, and that will come to you at the December board. It's safe to say that given we're seeing the actual trends below our current forecasts, that we will be reflecting that and we will be lowering our forecasts. It's also true that in the discussions with government and their advisors, KPMG, that they're also reflecting the reality of lower demand than we had previously jointly expected when we put the original forecast together. And therefore we are putting into the budget measures to absorb the cost pressures, but a continued expectancy that an ongoing funding deal will provide the passenger revenue risk support through the true-up mechanism that we've established over the last 18 months with government. We are, though, also working on what happens if we don't get the 500 million that we've asked for. Now, at the moment, and I'll come to this a little bit later on, we know that we've asked for 500 million based upon just keeping to that minimum level of cash, not to rebuilding it to the level it needs to be for the remainder of this year, and 1.2 billion pre those inflationary cost pressures for the next financial year. We're currently facing cost and revenue impacts of a pressure of about 300 million for the next financial year, and as a management team we're working really hard to absorb as much of that as possible. But clearly we will see over the coming weeks and months with a spending review announcement next Wednesday. I don't expect there'll be anything we hear about TfL in that, but there will then be a period of discussion leading up to the 11th of December about our own budget, where we really need to establish with government what are the outcomes they're expecting TfL to deliver. We've made the case very strongly, and as per the Prime Minister's own roadmap for the green economy that was set out this week, that we believe the financial sustainability plan we submitted in January and the revised budget process that we've put together supports the delivery of decarbonised public transport and other transport in London by 2030, is not only the environmentally sustainable option, but it's also the financially sustainable option. And the key thing I don't think people have grasped from our plans is that government are telling us we need to be off revenue support by April 2023. We've always said we only needed capital support from April 2023 onwards. And even then, we are looking to, in our policy consistent scenario, invest about £3 billion per annum, and we're looking for government support of £1.5 billion within that. So matched funding for the amount that the Mayor and TfL are putting in, which I think is really important that people understand. We're not asking for significantly more money than we're prepared to create and put in to this plan ourselves. In terms of Mealing's point, thank you for the point on the operating costs, and of course remember that is on top of the 300 million savings we were required to bake into the revised budget as part of the funding conditions for government. So we're actually, on that basis, nearly £400 million ahead of where we thought we would be in our original budget for the year. And that's down to a lot of hard work from all my colleagues to the left, as opposed to that being an easy thing to achieve. The staff cost reductions, next time we bring the report, we'll make sure we bring back the page we've always had before, so you can see the trajectory around both permanent and non-permanent labour. At the moment, given where we are, we continue to bear down on non-permanent labour and consultancy, but because we're bringing on new services, whether it's the Northern Line extension, for ULEX, the introduction of ULEX, for the introduction of the Elizabeth line into service, we would actually expect an increase in permanent headcount as we bring on new services. But our focus is on maintaining our downward trajectory on like-for-like operating costs. And then in terms of the inflation assumptions, Patrick, in terms of what we had baked into the budget, do you just want to cover that? Before we do, I'll just remind people that the inflationary impact will have an impact, because our fares are based upon the July RPI, which on an assumption of RPI plus 1%, that would be 4.8%. Our costs are largely contractually based upon February 2022 RPI, and the current forecast for that would be a base RPI of nearly 5%. So that inflationary pressure really will put a lot of strain on our budget going into the years ahead. Patrick?
In our budget, we assumed RPI in the short term would be between 3 and 3.5%. And we've seen it running above 4, and this morning the data for September came out and RPI was 4.9%. That just gives you a sense that we've got a 1 to 2% pressure so far on inflation.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Just Ben and Anne in that order, please. Ben.
First of all, congratulations on the operating costs. I think that's incredibly hard work, and as you said, that's on top of some pretty strenuous assumptions that were built into the base case already. So I think that's exemplary work and has really helped you kind of, if you like, balance the books. The other item that's coming through is on capital renewals. My question is, to what extent is that timing issues, and therefore we're going to face a headwind over the next kind of 6, 12, 18 months? Or to what extent, as an actual fact, are we building up a little bit of a deficit when it comes to capital renewals? And if we are building up a little bit of a deficit, which is something we've always tried to avoid, I think it's very important we highlight that and we make sure as a board we get visibility around that, because that in the end is something that will come back, that will have to be paid for by TfL. And as you know, when you push these things back, it costs more to actually upgrade investment you haven't undertaken in the past, and it does doing it at the right time.
Thanks, Ben. Anne.
So I just wanted to make 2 points. One, agree about the operating costs, and it's a very good position, but I'd reinforce what Patrick basically said, particularly around fuel and energy. We're going to see some big pressures coming onto our operating costs going forward. I'm glad to see from what Patrick is saying that at least in the short term we've got some amelioration against that in terms of how we've set it up, but certainly going on to next year. My other comment is really again around cash balances. I look at that graph and sort of gasp really, because the idea that we will be down to sort of less than £800 million worth of cash by the end of the year is pretty sobering, and I think we all need to remember that it was only because we'd built them up to 2 million that we managed to survive the first couple of months of the pandemic. So certainly in terms of any long-term financial sustainability, we need a plan for building those cash balances back up again. And that's the only way that we can have stability going forward. So grateful for everything the government's done so far, but we really do need to get sorted out what's happening after December for this year, and in the longer term how we get some sort of stability around our finances so that we can go forward with some sort of confidence and provide value for money services that we want to. Thank you.
Chair. So, Ben, I mean, you're spot on with capital renewals. There's a couple of things happening here. There is some slippage and timing differences. That is caused by our inability to plan and deliver the level of capital renewals and capital enhancements that we plan to because of the nature of short-term funding deals. So, for example, in January 2021, we would have been letting contracts for the budget that we were expecting to sign off in March. Because of the nature of the short-term funding deals, it was the 1st of June before we had an agreement that substantially took us through part of this year. That meant that I was unable to let my colleagues go out and let contracts to undertake our renewal, anything other than our absolutely safety critical renewal, such as track renewal, that doesn't fail safe, as we know. So we allowed those sorts of things to go ahead, but everything else, we had to really be cautious about what we commit to. Now, in our funding agreement, there is some comfort language that says government recognises there is a need for TfL to be able to plan and deliver these things. The issue is that those funding deals are not legally binding, and the very fact that the funding agreement doesn't go beyond the 11th of December, and as yet we have no clue really what the funding settlement will be post 11th of December, means the local government finance environment in which we act forces us to act prudently and therefore to constrain the amount of commitments that we can enter into, particularly as we can see our cash balances are not sufficient to support our existing liabilities. But also, given the pressures of the last 18 months and the fact that so much of our expenditure is contractually committed, we've had to really pull the stop lever on things that are not contractually committed. And by definition, that does tend to be our renewals work bank. So what has been happening is we are building a deficit in our renewals work bank, which we know from all of the examples across Network Rail and what used to be called Highways England, and also from some work done by the Comet, which is the global system, that you effectively end up costing about 30% more by the lack of ability to plan ahead. Now, that's not good value for money for the public purse. And in whole life cost terms, it can cost you twice as much to keep deferring the big asset replacements such as rolling stock and signalling that are currently something that we are pushing heavily for as part of a longer term framework. We realise we're not going to get 5-10 years worth of money. What we're asking for is a shared set of priorities so that we can begin to plan ahead and execute things efficiently in value for money terms of the public purse. And then, Anne, you're absolutely right. So, you know, in all of our discussions with government, we are making the point about the need to rebuild our cash reserves. That's very difficult going. We understand, absolutely, the pressure the country is under financially, and it's difficult for people to understand that the 1.2 billion in TfL's bank account is not just sat there being wasted. It's necessary for an organisation of this scale and complexity to have cash. Becky and I've had many discussions about this, and I know Becky understands this very well. But it's easy for people to look at that and say, why can't that be spent on whatever? The reality is, you know, even if we had an explicit government guarantee, then we would still need cash in order to be able to operate. And therefore, you know, we've got to think about and work through what level of shock is TfL meant to sustain post-April 2023, and that has to be provided for either in cash balances or access to government funding in order to do that as efficiently as we can with public money.
So, Patrick, thank you very much. Just to remind colleagues, before the pandemic... Sorry, Ben.
Just a quick Simon, are you going to help us understand that capital renewal liability as it grows? I think it's a really important, this doesn't get lost. I think it's really important, perhaps it's with PIC, that we're able to actually see what some of those deferrals mean and how that liability grows through time.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So yes, we will bring that back to PIC. What we've been doing with our assets, we've been maturing our asset understanding and our asset condition work. We've effectively asked the teams to ensure that we are doing all of the asset condition surveys, even if we can't afford to do the work, so we understand where we are. What we found out over the last 2 years as we've matured those asset condition is that the assets are in a worse condition than we had previously expected, which is why our plans had a higher level of renewals than our 2019 business plan. It's based on asset condition, not a desire to do things more quickly than they're otherwise needed. But we will use PIC to bring regular updates on that.
Is that okay, Ben? Great. Okay, look, we're asked to note the reports from Patrick and Simon, just to acknowledge that Simon worked incredibly hard with us before the pandemic began to reduce our deficits by north of 71%, to increase our cash balances by north of 13%. Between 2000 and 2016, the operating costs on a like-for-like basis went up every single year between 2000 and 2016. Between 2016 and the pandemic beginning, our operating costs on a like-for-like basis were going down every year. And so, Simon, thanks to your team, and Patrick, thanks for the presentations, and I know the Finance Committee will be keeping abreast of developments. We really hope, Andy, we aren't having to speak on the 9th and 10th into the late hours before the 11th when the money runs out, and so fingers crossed that our government reps can persuade the government to do things sooner rather than later. Thanks for the questions as well. Let's move on to the various panels and committees that have met, just for them to give us any additional comments on the reports they've presented. I want to ask Mark to step in and give us an update on the Safety, Sustainability, Human Resources panel meeting held on the 14th of September.
Thank you, Chair. So first, in terms of safety, we discussed the cycling accident at Holborn that Julian referred to earlier, and also the collision at Victoria Bus Station, which resulted in 2 serious injuries and a fatality. And at the time of our meeting, there were 95 members of staff or related to TfL that had tragically died as a result of COVID, and of course that's now, as you reported earlier, Mayor, 102, so very sad to report that fact. In terms of sustainability, we discussed the sustainability report and the corporate environment plan, which was published at the end of September. And in regard to human resources and the quarterly report, we talked about the upcoming, now launched viewpoint survey for staff at TfL, and we look forward to receiving the outcome of that when it's available for members to discuss in due course. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just something I should have said earlier on, that just when Julian spoke about Holborn, one of the things Gareth is working on is to do works, even if it's not what we'd like it to be permanently, to improve junctions and stuff. Holborn's a good example where money's been spent with the council to make sure we can do those works rather than waiting for a perfect system X years down the road. So that's helpful. Thanks. We're asked to note the report. Is that agreed? Thanks. The next committee is the Audit and Assurance Committee, and they met on the 15th of September, and the chair is Anne.
Thanks, Chair. Effectively, quite a number of items on the agenda have already been dealt with at the board, like the accounts, so I'm not going to go into those. 2 things that I just wanted to raise was, first of all, the final annual audit letter was considered at the meeting, and I would like to point out that it's not a qualification but a comment that they have made around the need for a long-term funding agreement if we are going to provide value for money. So there's a conditional comment around our value for money processes, because the short-term agreements hamper us taking good value for money decisions. And the other thing that I wanted to just raise, well, 2 things. Again, in terms of external audit, we did agree to participate in the sort of national external audit process for appointment of our external auditors using the PSAA, I think it is. And not to have our own arrangements on it, which is a much better value for money way of going about it. And the last thing I just wanted to mention was I thought there was a really good discussion at the meeting around the enterprise risk of a major security incident, particularly around cyber security. And it's very good to see that we now have a permanent appointment as a head of cyber security, Jules Gascoigne, who came and talked to us about it and gave us a really good briefing about what's happening and what the roadmap is to make us much more resilient in that area, building on the good foundations already there. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. For Austin, note the item. Is that agreed? Great. Heidi's going to tell us about multi-train squadron testing as the chair of the Elizabeth Committee.
That's a test.
I'm joking.
I think it's running lots of trains close together. Is that right, roughly? So yeah, Mark covered a lot of the issues in his presentation, so I won't go over those. We had a presentation from the PREP, as is normal, in our committee meetings. And I think it was good to hear the project representative congratulate the team on the progress that's being made, whilst highlighting the risks that still remain. Just to highlight one thing that isn't in the written paper, we agreed as a committee to convene informally as well with the senior team to talk about entry into trial operations post the new software landing. Just to understand the detail of that, and so that will be taking place before the next committee meeting.
Understood. That's very helpful. Any questions or comments to Heidi or us to note the items? Is that agreed?
Yeah.
Thanks. So move on to the Finance Committee. Ben, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. Quite a busy session actually on the finance report for the period. We are watching inflation very closely as a committee. We're just also very focused on the reforecasting process that's going on at the moment. Just an inordinate number of risks kind of looking forward for the organisation, I think. So that's something we're very focused on as a committee. Brings us on to the whole issue of kind of cash. I know we said this earlier. I do think it's just worth reiterating that 1.2 billion, which is only 60 days of operating expenditure, that is a bare minimum. And we had taken that higher as a committee because we were concerned about Brexit and the uncertain outlook. And so it's from that higher figure that we've come down from. So I want people to be aware of that. We also did some probing on the 1.6 billion currently because that looks quite high. And so we wondered, why is it high? Are we just being too cautious here? Are the forecasts appropriate? We went through that in some detail. It really is, as Simon and Patrick outlined, around the timing of investments, because we had to delay some of those, and also some of the funding that's come up front. And so we looked at that quite hard, and we're very confident that dire forecast is relevant and is appropriate for us to be looking at as a committee and as a board. Wanted to talk a little bit about ratings. I think these are important. S&P, one of the big rating organisations, did affirm their ratings, and their outlook is stable. However, Moody's downgraded their short-term and their long-term ratings and maintained their negative outlook for TfL. Fitch, another rating agency, a third rating agency, remains unchanged. That's really important. That pushes up our cost of borrowing. It means we have to really rely on the Public Works Loan Board going forward. And crucially, don't want to go into details, we've gone into the commercial paper market as an organisation. That's a very flexible, low-cost market for us. It's given us a lot of resilience. It's enabled us to actually borrow very thoughtfully in a timely manner, in a flexible manner. That's now no longer open to us. So the rating agencies do also look at the cash balances. They do also look at our resilience. We have slipped, and it's constraining our ability to operate, and it will increase our costs as an organisation, so we should be aware of that. On the 29th of July 2021, the board did delegate powers to the committee for the Treasury Management Strategy and also Treasury Management Policies. They're quite arcane things. I got to go through them a lot over the last few years. Just want to reassure the board that we do take those policies and that strategy very seriously as a committee. We have gone through those in detail. We are very, very happy with both of those. Also wanted to mention, sorry, there was quite a lot we spoke about, TfL Properties. TfL Property is a really exciting development for Transport for London. It's been something that Greg and others have been pushing for a long time. It's important because having a really sophisticated property arm will unlock development, and we heard about the 9 Elms development, where I think you said now 22,000 extra homes, Alex. When we look at how, and also by the way, ultimately, this will give us ultimately another source of revenues and greater resilience. And other mass transit organisations around the world have this type of structure, so we think it's really appropriate thing to have. When we're looking at the funding of TfL properties, it's going to be standalone, it's going to be separate from the day-to-day running of the organisation. We think that separation is very important, and we really think it's important there is strong commercial discipline within TfL properties. So we're quite comfortable with the policy that's been put in place and the strategy that's going forward for TfL properties and funding. I just wanted to reassure the board that is a common funding model for property companies. So we're not doing anything out of the ordinary at TfL. We're doing something that is quite common in the property market. Power purchase agreements, the plan had been to look to get 10% of our electricity needs for renewables by entering into power purchase agreements in the spot market. You've all seen what's happened to the spot market for energy prices at the moment. So we concluded that it was probably inopportune to try and push ahead with spot market deals at this point in time. We will continue to monitor that, and we urged TfL to keep looking at other options when it comes to power purchase agreements for renewable energy. It's a key part of our pledge to be net zero by 2030. We also spoke about the spending review submission. It will be the 27th of October when the spending review comes out from the government. The deadline for the submission was the 30th of September. Just wanted to say that when we look at that, TfL is taking into account new realities of that we're in now as an economy and as a nation. And so the planned spend on enhancements and extensions is now down by over 5.7 billion over 10 years. So actually we really are cutting our cloth to kind of fit the new environment. I just wanted to say we went through that submission. I thought it did demonstrate that we can support UK economic recovery, we can support decarbonisation, and we heard about bus fleet to zero. It will support levelling up. We've also had an eye on your transport strategy, Mayor. So we were very comfortable with that submission. I just want to say and reiterate, the objective is for TfL to be able to fund its own operations from 2023, 2024 onwards itself. As you said, Simon, it's only looking for government support for investment. And so we thought it was a great submission and we commended it, and that went in time for that 30th of September submission date. Sorry, Chair.
Yeah,
That's quite a lot of stuff we went through.
Don't apologise at all, particularly in the current context of the scrutiny you're giving. It's very important, and it's valued by Simon and the team as well. Any questions or comments to Ben or Simon before we... Heidi?
Just a quick comment. Ben, I think, did a really good job of giving a very comprehensive overview of everything we talked about. Just on the discussion we had around power purchase agreements, I think as a committee we were very clear that we would like to see the purchase of electricity from a new renewable asset as soon as possible. So rather than purchasing from an existing asset, a renewables asset, that we wanted the team, we gave very clear guidance, I think, to the team to say, can you bring that forward and see if we can expedite the work on that second PPA that we've been considering. And also just to reassure you, Chair, and others around the table that on the work that we're doing around commercial development and setting up a new property vehicle, that we are fully involving GLA Housing and Land colleagues in those discussions to ensure that we're all completely aligned as well. And so just wanted to provide that reassurance.
Thanks, Alex. Giving a chance just to reassure colleagues across the GLA, from Police Service, Fire Brigade, the GLA Zone, House and Land, TfL, working very closely together in addition to other partners in the other section. And I'm sure, Simon, you'll pregnate some of the issues Ben raised about the consequences of our credit rating when it comes to conversations with the government in the next few days and weeks. Thanks. We're asked to note that report. Is that agreed? Yeah. Thanks. Let's move on to the Customer Service and Operational Performance panel, and that's Mealing.
Thank you, Chair. We looked at regular customer services and operational performance report. I'm pleased to report that our major customer care metrics continue to hold up, in particularly under these challenging times. However, the panel was a bit concerned that some of these customer care metrics might be impacted on in a negative way over the issue of reduction of mask wearing. So we had quite a lot of detailed discussion about this challenge. And obviously, I think that remains the challenge. And I think our view is that how do we normalize mask wearing, to become like not smoking on the network is now so normalized, or wearing a seat belt. I think that remains the challenge with TfL. But we totally support our officers in their efforts. We also received an update on the recent adverse weather impact on our network, particularly the flooding incidents recently. And again, we would like to thank the staff who worked all hours to make sure that the network continues operating. The good work on extending and improving bus services to hospitals continue. And this was particularly important during the pandemic in enabling our NHS workers to, particularly those on shift work, to get to the hospitals. We also had an update on how to win back customers as part of our recovery strategy, much of which has been covered by Andy and Vernon, and we will continue to revisit that in detail as the recovery happens. And we also discuss in detail our enterprise risk, which is about any disparity action of this organization and its impact on leading to unequal and unfair outcomes on staff and on our customers. And it was agreed that with our new diversity and inclusion director, she is working with her team and the rest of the organization to develop a comprehensive inclusion program. And it was agreed that maybe the whole board would like to actually receive a briefing on this when the work is complete. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions to Meeling? We're asked to note that report. Is that agreed? Yeah. Okay, we're now going to move on to the Programmes and Investment Committee. The meeting of the committee was in Court and occurred after the papers for this meeting were published. The decisions were taken after the meeting by Greg Clark under the Chair's action following consideration of the views of committee members. Greg, do you want to highlight any issues that should be brought to our attention?
Sure. Firstly, Chair, that the meeting was actually chaired by Dr. Nelson Ogden-Shankin, who's not here today, but I'm very grateful to him. And you've already heard, Chair, that all of the work of this committee takes place within the framework of that critical renewals programme that Simon described so well before, and also this enhanced information we're now receiving on asset conditions. So the committee focuses very much on safety critical renewals and avoiding excessive future costs by foregoing investment that needs to be taken now. With that in mind, there was a strong focus in this committee, as always, on progress on value for money, very much driven by the agenda that you set, Mayor, at the start. But detailed work is now going on the multiple strands of the value for money framework that we achieve. And a lot of progress is being made. At some point, I would recommend the whole board receive a briefing on the value for money work because it's really exceptional. And then we had our annual reviews of progress on Silvertown Tunnel, major stations, surface technology, and also on track renewals, signalling, and the major stations within the project portfolio, all of which are progressing well within the framework of conditions that we're in. And we also did sign off the development agreement for Elephant and Castle. Those were the key items that were tackled at the meeting. But I would underline that the main focus here is on only undertaking those investments that are absolutely critical. The focus is on safety, and we're focusing like a laser beam on value for money.
Very good. That's very reassuring. Great. Any comments or questions to Greg? We're asked to note that report. Is that agreed? Okay. Any other business? There's none from me. Any other business? Okay. The next meeting is going to be on the 8th of December. by which time I hope we've reached a deal with the government. Fingers crossed. I'll see you all then.